In today's video we're going to talk about how to heat a larger reptile enclosure, and you're in the right place for that because basically all I own is massive enclosures. So what I want you to do is stick with me with this because I'm going to tell you that everything you know about heating is probably wrong. With that out of the way, let's get started. This is actually really simple. All you need to worry about is your patch of sunshine, your sunshine patch, and the air temperature in the enclosure. Now there is no cool end air temperature, warm end ambient air temperature, midway air temperature. That doesn't exist. That is simply people don't understand how the physics actually works. What I want you to do is imagine yourself in a field. And it's a really hot field, it's a really sunny day, and you are sweating, you're really hot, and there is a single tree, and you go and stand in the shade of that tree. And then you begin to feel yourself cool down. Now that isn't because the air temperature in that field has changed from here to here. No, all that's happened is you've gone from under sunshine to out of sunshine, or under radiation, out of radiation. And that's exactly what happens in our enclosures. Lots of people that are measuring different air temperatures along an enclosure are actually just seeing how much they can warm up their thermometer's probe under radiation. Again, how it felt on your skin, exactly how that thermometer's working. For example, I did this quick little experiment where I placed a digital thermometer in a light box. Now this light box has some really low quality cheap LEDs. It's a $20 light box off Amazon, right? But just from having lights and radiation upon it changes the reading of the thermometer. What's actually happening here is the radiation, however small perceived it is from you, is actually increasing the temperature of the thermometer. And that in turn is increasing the reading that it's giving out. That piece of equipment is no longer reading the air temperature of the environment, it's actually just reading how warm you're heating your thermometer up. So when people place equipment on the light end and the shade end and think that the air temperature is two different temperatures, all they're reading is how much can they warm their thermometer under lights. So in this little experiment, the starting air temperature of the room that we were in was around 17 degrees. And by the end of a 15-minute time, it rose to over 20 degrees. And when it was turned off, you could see that the thermometer was actually cooling, and then it was actually starting to get with equilibrium with the actual air temperature that it was reading before. So why is this important? Well, it's important because where you place your equipment to measure the air temperature in your enclosure plays a role in how accurate that actually is. The air temperature in an enclosure does not change within 7 foot of space. From left to right, air temperature is exactly the same. So what you want to do is take a thermometer, put it in the shaded end of an enclosure where there is no radiation, and that is the air temperature of the whole enclosure. Now the only time there actually is an air temperature gradient in a big enclosure is top to bottom, because heat will rise and it will be warmer at the top air temperature wise than it is at the bottom. Cool air will fall and hot air will rise, but across exactly the same. So all you need to worry about is creating the sunny patch and then just controlling the air temperature to make sure that it's warm enough. You want to have one isolated patch in an enclosure that you're dedicating towards your patch of sunshine. In big enclosures, you can use things like the Reptile Systems gold infrared bar. That's what I've got in my enclosures. That's basically a fancy heat bulb with a filament in the middle, and it reaches a radiance, and it's got a nice wide beam of infrared that projects out and warms a patch beneath it. You can have this in one patch directed onto a point, and then have your UV and your LEDs near that projecting down onto the same spot. You can measure your surface temperatures, and you can measure your UVI, and you can just dial in that one spot. That's all you need to do. Then what you'll see is you'll get an ambient temperature that begins to happen in this bigger enclosure as a byproduct of just having all these lights on. And you might actually find that that temperature is warm enough as a minimum air temperature for your given species. And if it's not, what you need to do is give them a non-light emitting heat source, like a ceramic or a radiant heat panel, or an advanced heating system if you're in the UK, which is like a mini radiator. put that on a thermostat and have a thermostat probe in the shaded end away from radiation, so it's actually reading the air temperature, and set that at your minimum threshold of what you want the air temperature to be. So let's say I've got a species that I want my minimum air temperature to be 20 degrees. I would just have that thermostat set it to 20 degrees, let that non-light emitting heat source kick on and bolster that air temperature and raise it up to our minimum standard. Then we've got a nice little basking spot that our reptile can go into and warm up their core and then move in and out of that. Reptiles are actually like little greenhouses, so it lets all that infrared in, but it doesn't let it out. So it just locks in that heat, and its core body temperature will often be far higher than the ambient air temperature of a given environment. So as long as you set up their little sunshine patch appropriately for your given species, they can go get hot, move in and out of that as much as they want. And then you just control the air temperature by bolstering it a little bit using a thermostat and a non-light emitting heat source. Now, if your air temperatures are getting too warm, what you can do is increase ventilation to actually release warm air, or you can actually use fans to pull excess warm air out of the enclosure. But I think a lot of people are struggling with getting it warm enough because they think that there is a high-end air temperature that they have to hit, and a midway and a low-way, and they think, how do I do that in a big enclosure? Well, the truth is, that's a lie. There is only one air temperature sideways, and then there is one top to bottom. But you might find that it's going to rise up and do that anyway. The other thing to think about is, remember, your big enclosure, the air temperature in that enclosure is never going to be less than the room that it's in. So it's only ever going to be equal to the outside of the enclosure or more than. So what you can actually do is heat the room that they're in up to the minimum standard, and then that's easier. So let's say your enclosure is in a room, you can heat that entire room up to 20 degrees, and then you don't actually need to have the thermostat and the non-light emitting heat source in the enclosure because you've done it with the room, and then it's simply just a basking spot. What you can do if you've got a really tall enclosure and you want them to be able to bask on the floor and in an arboreal up high climbing position, you could put a shelf halfway and have a basking spot onto that shelf that's midway in the enclosure, midway up, so they can bask up top, and then you can get lights and mount that to the underside of that shelf that's halfway, so they can actually bask on the floor. And what I think you'll find is the air temperature is going to be plenty high enough once you've done something like that as well. What you can also do is use clever materials like rocks and stones, place them along the floor in areas or up high where infrared is going to be hitting it. They're going to warm up, and what they're going to do is reach a temperature and start warming up the air around them because they've got so hot. So if you place them along the floor, they're going to raise the air temperature at the lower level of a big tall enclosure as well. So clever placement of materials also will help with the thermal masses in that enclosure. Just make sure that things like ceramic heat emitters that are obviously non-light emitting, if you're going to use them, make sure you guard them with a cage guard just so your reptile can't burn itself. So what I want you to do is understand that there's only one air temperature sideways, and then there is one top to bottom because heat rises. Then you want to make your sunshine patch and then bolster your minimum air temperature, and that's all you need to do. That's literally it. If you like these types of videos, there's plenty more of these coming. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video.